Hi everyone and welcome to the Tormek live sharpening classes. It's fun to be back. This will be the very last episode for 2022, so we are excited to get going. We've decided that the subject for today will be sharpening pressure and how you can use sharpening pressure to work with you instead of against you.
Absolutely.
We have decided to divide this episode into 3 different segments. So we will start by talking about grinding pressure on stones, and then we will talk about grinding pressure on diamond wheels, and finally we will be talking about pressure on the honing wheels and how to hone. So that is the plan for today. But first things first, we should present ourselves. My name is Sebastian and I'm a country sales manager here at Tormek, and with me, as always by my side, I have the sharpening doctor Wolfgang. And
hello.
This feels like a perfect episode for you, Wolfgang, where you can get really nerdy with the details and you can preach about sharpening, or what do you say?
Sure. It's a lot of theory,
Yes.
which you can use and in your sharpening, because it's not only about angles and positions and how to clamp, it's much, much more. And this is one of the basics and mostly a little bit forgotten or...
Yes, sometimes perhaps I think we take it for granted that people know about sharpening pressure because we use the machine very much, but you can really do a lot with sharpening pressure.
Exactly. You have your grit, you have the speed, and that's it. But it's much, much more.
Yes. Great. I thought we would start talking about the grinding stones and pressure, but before that, I want to remind everyone that it's live, so please ask your questions, and so we'll try to answer them as best as possible during the episode. I saw we had a couple of questions just in the beginning. And also, since it's live, we might make mistakes, and we don't have time to correct our sometimes doubtful English. Now, let's go. Yes, I said we would start with sharpening pressure on stones, but before that, the foundation of the Tormek, or the Tormek, is built in a way that makes grinding pressure possible. It's a very strong machine, and not all sharpeners or other brands are as strong, but the strongness of the machine is what makes it possible to add that extra pressure when you sharpen and speed up the process. Could you please guide us, Wolfgang, why is the Tormek so strong and what is the secret behind it?
First of all, of course, a strong motor. That's one thing. It's not only the watts in, it's also the watts out, and the transmission, because the pressure is interesting for us from the motor, or the Newton meter, what is coming here on the top where you're sharpening. And we achieve it here with our free hanging motor. You see it's movable, it's the motor shaft you see here on the side, and the drive wheel. And when I start the machine, you will see immediately it will jump a little bit, and because the machine is strong, you have a stone about 3.8 kilos plus water, so roughly 5 kilos. Here start from directly. You see a little bit a jump. I can show you again. Here when it's jumping a little bit, you get full speed. What I do, I just apply a little bit water. Otherwise I don't have skin left. I apply with my hand here pressure, so I simulate sharpening pressure and have a look what happens here. You see, when I put my brush on, I got more contact and full pressure on the driving wheel. So that means I maintain the speed, more or less, and of course the pressure. This is absolutely unique. Others have different solution, but you just use the pressure and don't release it. This is one thing for the pressure in the rotation. But then we use, of course, the pressure when we are sharpening. And this is one of the things what we want to just put this back here before we forget.
Another advantage with this suspended motor is that it makes it very strong and almost impossible to stop, but also it makes the engine very long lasting, since it doesn't work harder than necessary.
Exactly, it releases immediately. When you release the pressure, it goes
in
a free
and that's
run.
why we see Tormeks that are 45 years old, because the motor has a very long lifespan. That's not only because it's a good motor, but also because it never works harder than necessary. So
exactly,
it has more advantages than only making it very strong.
Yep, the heat is the most poisoning thing for the motor, and because when we release, we have no pressure, so motor's running freely.
Should we go on pressure on the stones? Am I correct if I say the more pressure, the more steel removal you make?
Yes and no.
Yes and no. It's never easy. There's always...
It's a balance, and this is what we try to explain a little bit today, because it depends on material, what tool, the size of the tool. The sharpening material means which stone or diamond wheels. So we talk first now about stones, and then we talk about the wheels, the diamond wheels, and then we go hooning. So there's always a little bit of difference, because it's not only, as I said before, clamp the tool, place it, and just apply the right angle, and then you move. You can just speed up, or with wrongdoing, you prolong the process. And this is a little bit what you have to learn. You have to, of course, by seeing and feeling, but mostly people feel when we get, it takes so long time, because they're missing something, because they just add and apply the angle, put a little bit pressure on, and sharpen. But it's,
if we say generally speaking, the rougher the stone is, the more pressure, the faster it goes. The finer a stone is, the less pressure, the finer finish you get.
Again, different between the material.
Yes.
You can, this will be a talk, but one absolute of the basics, I want to ask Hugo, come over to the chart here. It's a little excerpt from the handbook. You know, you use the handbook maybe once in your lifetime in the beginning, or never, or sometimes just for troubleshooting. But in the beginning of in our handbook, there are a lot of good information about pressure, angles, and whatever. But now, as I said, we talk about the pressure. If you just think, you apply 10 kilos, it's about 100 Newton, 10 kilos pressure, it's quite a lot, which is no problem for the machine. But if you use like a plain iron, which is 50 millimeters or wider, so that means you use complete the surface of the stone, or for the T4 it's about 40 millimeters, but even if you use 50, you use the complete width of the stone, and apply the pressure, and you have a 25-degree angle. And then of course it depends how thick the blade is, but we assume you have, this is the area, 235 square millimeters of surface touching the stone. So the 10 kilo divided or evenly on the surface means you get 0.43 Newton per millimeter. So that means around 400 grams per square millimeter. If you go to another tool, which like 6 millimeters chisel, the surface is getting smaller, you touch on the stone. But the same pressure means you get a high pressure on a smaller surface, so it's about 5 times higher, you see, 2.1 Newton. When you go next step further, on a gouge, for example, wood carving, you touch a very small area, maybe just a millimeter wide, or maybe 1.5 or 2 millimeters, depends how bent it is. You have 10 kilos on that little bit surface, that means 21 Newton per millimeter. So it is enormous high pressure for sharpening. So that means you would sharpen here faster than here, it speed up the process. But then, as I said, the material come into the blade. Because if you have these planer blades from Lean Easel, which are a little bit thicker, quite hard steel, and you apply a lot of pressure, what do you also do? The sharpening crystals will press in the stone, because the crystals are baked in the material of the stone. So you press them in, and even you cut them off more or less. So you get, with a high pressure, less effect. So a little bit less effect, A rougher stone speed up the process. And this is then important. When I'm out there, a lot of people wonder what it is. They use it for deburring or just put it away and don't use it. This is one of the keys. The stone has a grit of 220. It will get finer and finer through sharpening with normal medium pressure. So you end up around 600 grit. And that makes things slow. So therefore, reactivate the stone. At the same time, you clean, and then I think we have one question there, we can answer that in that way, when the stone clogs.
Yeah.
There are two ways. One is you have a soft steel, and then it is in the stone. It's blocking, of course, and then the crystals doesn't stick up because you have the material between the crystals. So it's a flat surface, and you don't remove enough material for normal speedy sharpening. So just clean the surface. On that way, we have in the handbook, it's like that, but it's more meant about over the edge to use it, because then you rough up and take out the kernels and reactivate it from the surface. When you use it flat, in that way or in that way, you will glaze the stone. You flatten, you sharpen the tips off, and then you again get a flat surface with less result. So really use the edge, which is much more aggressive.
And it's the same as with grinding pressure. The less surface you have here, the harder the more Newton meter you put on the stone, the faster it is to roughen up the stone.
We can just show it. You see already on the surface a little bit of white lines. And here also the sound. Then you feel also it's much rough, and you hear maybe, I go with my micro with the hand. So there's something happening. You get removed much more material. But if you would use like planer iron now.
We had a question, we could answer it right away.
Yeah.
How much pressure and how long should be applied, and for how long should you, when you want to roughen up the stone?
So you can say roughly about between 10 and 20 seconds. Depends, it's very fine.
Yeah.
To the other end of the grit.
Yeah.
Takes a little bit longer. Then you have already a little bit rougher stone. It goes faster, of course. So about 10 to 15 seconds, you can quite apply good pressure.
A lot of pressure and use the edge.
And then use really over, not just on one position, because then you get a groove in here. And then when you move the groove on the side, then you put the edge into the stone. And you see it was quite fine, it goes fast. The other side, then you can use not the edge, the fine side always over the surface. And then if you listen, the sound is already getting finer and finer. And when you get these little bit hacks here, it's just because only really you take the crystals off, and then they vanish. It's more or less vanishing, and then you feel already it's off. Go with the micro deed. This here, maybe you hear already. It's very nearly nothing. It's very flat. So that surface is very fine. This, of course, it doesn't matter if you have a big white tool. It will sharpen, of course, very slow. And you can, of course, better control a fine sharpening. Results also in a finer edge.
Yeah.
Especially if you have small tools. As we said here, you apply less, not the same. We have here, just for explaining, the same pressure. Here you would use, of course, only a 50th, because between here it's only a 50th. Here it's a fifth, and up to here it's a 50th of the pressure. Yeah, so that means if you have 10 kilos here, you apply here maybe 200 grams.
Yeah.
We have the same pressure per millimeter. like here.
Exactly. So to get the same result on a plain iron and a gouge, you need to put 50 times more pressure on a planing iron than on the gouge. And
Exactly.
that's good to have in when you sharpen a gouge. You need to be more careful when applying.
That means 10 kilos. That means 200 grams then, just roughly. Then you get an idea how much it is, because it's just a millimeter you apply here. And then, of course, for these tools, then we come to the materials. It's more softer than an iron blade.
Yeah.
Or we have a HSS tool, speed steel for ball gouges or wood turning gouges. That means here, less pressure, and then you have also a good control. And then I use a finer grit, because you want anyway a very fine surface and a good polished surface. Because the rougher the stone is, the more grooves you get.
Yes.
And this is a little bit, I want to explain here a little bit very theoretical here, and you get a little bit idea what I mean also. And this explains maybe also, because we get questions about, do you have another coarse stone like the 220? In the end, it doesn't speed up your process. The process when you speed up is not the grit, it's the pressure and the speed. Because then you have a quite rough surface, then you have to change the stone, and you have to do the same process again. So it's good for removal materials. If you change the shape of a tool, perfect, then you can speed up. But anyway, you have to go to the next finer grit, or another step, maybe 2 steps, to get a fine edge. So that means even on a stone, and mostly we get it from knife sharpening, when it's maybe a coarser grit. If you just think surface compared to a fine grit, the crystals coming up, and you have a tool here, well, was not good from the didactic. It was already this way, and then so you have the big crystals.
Shall I hold the board for you?
Yes, I think
While
it's rolling a little bit here, and then you have the tool. So, hard material, you don't come in very deep here in the material. You come up maybe only this deep. But then you touch, we say in this example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, on 6 points. You remove material. Here you don't remove anything. Here you have, in the same, you don't get deeper, but you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. For example, points you can sharpen. Okay, you move on the sideways, but you have only less crystals which do the job. Even if you go sideways, so that leaves you also a deeper grooves in the end, and then you have to go over here. So that means it doesn't speed up, because especially when it's hard material, it's softer, you get of course deeper in there with the same pressure. But anyway, you have all the space in between you have to remove. Then you take this here. What happens? The crystals get used. They get maybe, just example-wise, 2 or 3 small points in here. What you end up? More or less in the same grid here. Maybe you have always felt it when you have your stone is coarse, you sharpen after a while, it goes back to the finer grid. So at the end, if you have one coarse stone, you have to remove to go here. You have to do the job twice. There's no, in total, no gain in any time. It's just felt faster. Because you have one stone 20 times going over, here maybe only 10 times, the half time, but you have to go over and finish anyway here. So you don't gain anything. And the same is here, it gets smaller and smaller, but you can apply more pressure because the pressure is divided through all the contact points. So there's less pressure, so they will not crack as fast as the small or the less number of crystals, because the pressure on each of the crystals is higher, it will crack earlier. And this is also why we developed the black stone. The black stone silicon carbide is a little bit stronger, it's a little bit harder, a little bit more aggressive, but still 220 grit. But this cracks occur faster on our aluminum oxide compared to the silicon carbide. This is the reason, but it doesn't speed up the process. This is one of the important points to remember: the grit and the material. It takes time, it doesn't matter. You don't get a sharpness here, you get a sharpness. The finer the grit, the sharper your edge is, of course, because you have to remove all you see the rough grooves when you sharpen. So this is one of the important understanding, because the grit is not static, it goes back. It's the same on a bench grinder, it's the same on even on sandpaper or sanding paper, it is exactly the same. It will used up after a while.
This is, as you said, not unique for the Tormek. This is basic grinding.
It's basic grinding.
In general.
And then the speed, if you just look on a 220 grit from our stone and a 220 grit for a bench grinder, it's much coarse, but it's the same 220. But then you have also, if 220, you feel it is a little bit jumping, then you have the same.
Yeah.
Rough, and then you have to go finer.
Could you perhaps...
It's perfect for reshaping, or if you want to remove a lot of material when it's heavily damaged. But if it's just for maintaining with small damage, it takes longer with a rough stone, and then on that it's easier with the 220 already we have with the stone grader changing the grit. And this is why I said it's important what you do here with a stone grader. You don't need a rougher stone.
You can only do everything in one stone. But if you would like, for example, to reshape or take away quite a lot of material on a plain iron, could you show us how much pressure you would put? I don't know if it's...
It's difficult to show the pressure, how much. But here, when you have a rough, if you have like really deep chips in there because you hit the nail or whatever, it's the same like on a chisel. I had this in Switzerland, for example, a guy who had 40 millimeter huge from a carpentry, heavily damaged. He said it takes a lot of time, 20 hours, and said not even 2 hours or 20 minutes. It is just, I showed him, it took exactly 2 minutes and 53 seconds. We clocked it from the beginning, and then really that's the magic here. Use it, rough it up, then you apply pressure. When you feel after a few strokes and the stone is already getting soft or fine again, then you have too much pressure. Because again, too much pressure is maybe counterproductive than productive. There's a little bit less pressure, maybe is more effective because the stone is coarser, takes a little bit more material than cracking the crystals, and you end up here again.
We get a couple of questions on how often you should use the stone grader.
You can use it as often as you want, even if you're sharpening like this, because you have fixed here. Sometimes I go here in the front. If I have to remove a lot of material, I go there and roughen during the sharpening, and then apply pressure again. And then, okay, I showed slow. This is also, don't need to be fast, just even, or you can even slower. The more contact you have, especially then when we talk about diamonds. Because when you go fast, you have this speed and you have that speed.
It doesn't go faster if you move faster.
Exactly. Hectic, just take your time. It's like meditation. Then you remove quite a lot of material. And then if you feel, okay, it's too soft, and then you hear it already, go there, just roughen up again in between. absolutely no problem. I was in October in Turkey, and a lot of bolt gouges and chisels we had to reshape, but we had only the standard stone. So it took a while, of course, but we use extensively that to speed up the process. And then it was a very good, I had a guy with me, showed him and trained him. And really, he saw, even on a chisel, a little bit less pressure, was much faster in process than using too much power.
In general, we see people use the stone grader too little because it feels like it takes extra time to go with the stone grader many times when you sharpen, but it's the contrary. The more you use the stone grader, the faster it is.
Absolutely.
Almost, you could say.
Yeah. Refresh always the stone. That means also it's cleaning up the surface.
Yeah.
When it clogs, especially for softer material. And at the end, on a stone, you can't, at the end, never apply too much pressure.
No.
Because then the machine getting, of course, in some point you can, but then we can try, I don't know. It's just now live, a try.
Be careful.
Yeah. I put a lot of pressure on it to, you see, I don't know, it's about
You're
15,
you're
20,
shaking, Wolfgang.
I don't know, it's about 15 kilos at least, when I put pressure on it, and it still is working.
Yeah. It's almost impossible to stop. But
Yeah.
as you saw now, perhaps the stone went slower after a while, and then you have lost...
Also the speed, because it is not only the pressure, because the circumference means it's a distance times the speed of rotation. It's in 1 minute, you have a certain distance. But when it gets slower, the distance getting shorter, that means it sharpens less. So again, it's counterproductive.
Yeah.
And then even here you see what the rough stone, you can put pressure on it here. It's
Almost unstoppable.
It's nearly impossible to stop the machine, because the more the press, you get more the pressure here.
Great.
So this is very difficult to say how much pressure. In general, you can't use too much, but find the right balance depends on the material and the grit and the surface. I mean, the smaller tool, less pressure, especially the softer material. The harder, also use not too much pressure for small tools, because you will end up in grooves. You will see it for bolt gouges, because less surface, they're round. You will get very fast a groove. So use all the surface with less pressure. It stays sharper, sharper from the stone, more aggressive, because you don't flatten or crack the crystals as fast. And because the small surface reactivate the stone also on the sides, because it's got a small micro groove. When you move on the side, you have always a little bit the edge, which is quite aggressive, but you flatten and use it evenly. When you have only on one point, you will end up in a really groove, and you have to
And you will have often.
Yeah.
I would say generally people that are not using using the Tormek, they are very careful with pressure, because they come from high-speed grinders and they apply almost no pressure, or they come from other machines that will stop if you put pressure. So generally speaking, people should put more pressure on the Tormek when sharpening on stones if they want to remove material.
Exactly. And how much you see when it gets too fast to a finer grit, then release a little bit pressure.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit balanced. And if you're hard steel, for example, also, or you want to really remove a lot of materials, use also TT50, for example. This is a good tip if you're a wood turner and you use maybe a lot of in oak and use your tools quite heavily, maybe, or a beginner. That means your tools are getting faster dull, because it's a lot about technique. Then you can use 2 universal supports. In one way you sharpen your bolt gouges and chisels, and this one, a second one, you have this way. Place the TT50, the drilling tool, on top. because when you have chisels, you don't have to remove out and in and out and change the adjustments for your perfect angle. Then you go very on the stone, very slightly, maybe just release not one, when you release only a half a number, and just take the surface. And this gives you a really aggressive stone, extremely aggressive.
Exactly, so you can use it not only to true the stone when you need it flattened, but you can use it to roughen up the stone even rougher than you will be able to do with the SP650. So
exactly,
and good,
even faster. You don't go slow, because the slower you go, the finer is the surface.
Yeah.
If you go just a little bit rougher, fast in 30 seconds instead of 60 or 90 seconds.
So very thin, very fast pass, and you're good to go.
Exactly. And then you have always, you can sharpen in just a quick, and then you have a really aggressive stone without removing a lot of material, because you just the surface is the same here. You work more or less on the surface. You cut off here and reactivate and take out.
We have a question, I think it's from our good friend Ken. With lower grinding pressure, is there any advantage to use the 200 watt T8 motor compared with the 120 watt T4 motor?
At the end, again, the T4 is a little bit more in the speed higher. You have 90, the other is 120.
Yes.
To get again, because you have the same material here, to get the same distance in speed.
Yeah.
Of course, the 120 watt, it's stopped a little bit earlier. You can stop a T4 more easier than a T8, of course, but it's still there. It's power in there.
You can use it in the exact same way, but then of course the T8 is a bit stronger than the T4. So
it doesn't speed up the process at the
No.
end, not because we compensate through the speed,
Yeah.
Through the transmission from that side, and then the pressure is the same. And
it doesn't. There is no one of the machines that are faster. Great. Should we move on to the diamond wheel sharpening, perhaps? Because
Yes.
here we have to think a bit different.
one point maybe just to mention for the Japanese stone.
Yes.
When here, because it's nearly impossible to clock the stone, because it's more or less quite tight material.
The Japanese waterstone, the SG250, is a polishing stone.
Yep.
It is 4,000 grit.
Exactly.
And it's much softer than
Yep.
the other.
It will clock in that way when you have carbon steel, for example, knives. You feel it's getting very fast black,
Yeah.
and then you have to clean a little bit. But normally here you can apply pressure to get really good result, because you see the more kernels you have, and there's much more in between, so you can really apply pressure to get on each of these crystals on the tool a pressure. So here you can really apply pressure. But, it's the big but, the corners. If you have a fixed jig like this, which is fixed here, then you can't get a hook,
A nick.
a nick in the stone. If you have a blade, for example, and you come on the air, not perfectly flat, you come just slightly on the corner, and then you can, we talked about 1 millimeter before, we have 50 times the pressure. On this sharp edge, we have around 100 times and more with the same pressure. So you will get immediately a nick in the stone, and you got catched. So therefore, we recommend round off, because then the surface is bigger, and the risk to get a catch is less. We will see this also on the next step on the diamond wheels when you talked it. So very flat.
Great. You said about cleaning the stone. The easiest to clean in Japanese water stone is with the SP650, 650, the fine side.
The fine side. We don't recommend the rough side. Why? Because there are crystals in there. The stone is soft. It can happen when you, with the rough side, I do it, honestly, but then you have to carefully check the stone if not one of the crystals is in the stone, because then you destroy your surface. You polish, and then one of the crystals come up and destroy all your work and
your polishing work.
Exactly. So therefore, we don't recommend, because you have to really to be careful. And if you want to be absolutely perfect, you have that stone before, and you have a lot of slurry in there from sharpening. Change also the water, because you take up all the small crystals from the water trough even here on. So the best have clean water there to maintain some hygienic.
Great. Should we go for the diamond wheels?
Yes.
Or the diamond wheel?
We exchange that.
Here we have a brand new diamond wheel fine 250, and we could start with that perhaps, because when it's brand new we have a run-in period on the wheel.
Yep.
Because the diamond particles are very
because it's
pointy.
Exactly. Or maybe just a small drawing again here. You have the surface of the diamond wheel. Take a and this what I've drawn here, it's also valid for the diamond wheels. The course, we have 3 diamond wheels. We said we have the DC, the coarse 360 grit. We have the fine DF 250 or 200, depends what size for which machine, 600 grit, and the DE 250 or 200 for the extra fine with a 1200 grit. It's the same, different size of the surface, rough, finer, and extra fine. In the beginning, the crystals stand up maybe a little bit higher, and they're embedded in a nickel. They're electronic nickel plated. It can happen that a little bit of nickel maybe sticks up, and then you have a diamond stick up. So that means when you sharpen here, you get just 2 grooves maybe in your tool, because you don't touch the rest of the surface. It's a little bit extreme drawing, but just for the understanding. After a while, they will crack down to smaller ones in the same level, and then you have again your 600 grit. So it can happen, a few sticks up. So it takes me a few tools, 10 tools, or 1 tool. If you sharpen a few times, you will feel they're quite aggressive in the beginning, but then they will lose the aggressivity. That's total normal, it's fine. But when it happens later on, then you have too much pressure. When it gets too fast, fine, the stone or the wheel.
So during the running period, put not too much pressure, because the first 10 tools, that is the time it takes to get to the 600 grit.
Exactly, when the crystals stand up and you have your tool, you will immediately cut off them and then rip out, so less pressure.
And we have seen that happen quite a few times, that people have brand new tools, brand new diamond wheels, too much pressure, and they rip off and crack one of the from the beginning, and then unfortunately you can't prove the diamond wheel. So that's
exactly
your diamond
there
wheel. So
like they are.
Be very careful in the beginning.
And important, also use the 4% in solution.
It's
and then
the ACC 150, and this comes with the diamond wheels.
Exactly, it protects against stain and even the tools. You can use this also with the stone together, because it's also protecting carbon steel, your tools and not rust. Yeah. This is one thing. If you have never sharpened in your life, start not first time with a diamond wheel, because when you destroy it, it's gone. A stone, you can apply pressure, less pressure, you can play, you can repair it. This is our recommendation, because then you get a feeling about pressure, and then the diamond wheels apply the same pressure. There is no difference here. Stones, you can more or less pressure. Here, always the same pressure. And what I recommend is about maybe 200, 500 grams. That means when you have your tool and put pressure on it, you put a little bit pressure. You just look on my fingernails when they start getting in the tips white. That's enough pressure. So the diamond needs really time to cut. this is a crystal comes up and take material, or from that side when we sharpen a chisel. Really, they need time to cut. The other, you have more or less a slurry sharpening. So therefore also you get a little bit harder burr on a diamond wheel compared to a stone, because it's mixture about rough crystals and a little bit of slurry, the finer crystals. You have only one big takes off a shape.
So less pressure on the diamond wheel, not only to make it last longer, but also even if you would put more pressure, that wouldn't make sharpening faster.
Just speeds down the degradation, and you will end up buying a new one faster than you have maybe expected. So if you less pressure, they last quite a long time.
And we sometimes,
this is very important.
Sometimes see that experienced Tormek users that have used the stones for many years are used to use a lot of pressure, and they sometimes have difficulties with the diamond wheel because all of a sudden you need to put less pressure on it.
This is with all the super abrasives you call diamond or CBM or whatever for bench grinders, the same there too, less pressure. This is the properties of the material. So therefore it's a complete different technique.
Also, what we see quite often is that diamond wheels that have been used quite a long time are more used on the side of the wheel.
And this is
due to your explanation there with...
Exactly. When you're not really careful, not trained, for example. The most people use a machine also for knives. If you're not really, in the beginning, I said always, a tip, just try to peel off. I kind try here to peel off the water with no pressure. You see, when you come here, it's much more aggressive. Better is to start a little bit like here, very light, just to get the feeling how flat, how difficult it is really to lie flat on that you have the water complete. Just drain first and then apply a little bit pressure when you have the perfect flat contact to the surface, not going over the edge, because again, if you have 100 grams or 200 grams on that complete surface or only on one point, you have immediately a nick in there and then you will wear down because it's quite aggressive also.
And so the mistake people do is that they have the same pressure when they have the entire knife touching the wheel as they have when they come towards the edge, and therefore it will wear down more on the edge than on the...
Exactly, on that side, especially when you have here on it here, and again you lift up, it's again rounded, it's the same like a round tool. You have less contact point here, the same pressure when it's getting round, so you should release the pressure, less pressure, because you have less contact surface. Otherwise you will quite aggressive sharpen more here and also aggressive to the stone. So that means here less, and then even important when you lift up, it's the same what we say on the stone, concentrate on the middle, because when you lift too early, you're again on the outer, the circumference here, just as really here. And then you hear already, here really very delicate, just here, and then land. And then when you're flat on it. And then you hear, maybe you hear in the middle, these little bit coming between. So click, click, click. These are some crystals coming up, which are still aggressive. It's new. They will vanish, then you have an even sound. Then you know, now it's perfect.
We have a question here from Robert. Do you need to go slower in the beginning with the diamond wheel as less is touching? You don't need to go slower, but you need to put even less pressure.
Exactly. In general, the slower you move, you make your movements with all tools, the better you have the control, especially how you lie on the stone, your position. Then even the diamond have time to, if you have bigger surfaces, to take shaving off the material, because otherwise just sliding through, so they really can have the time to cut.
And Alexandria Knife Sharpening is asking, how long is ACC 150 good, and can I use it for a few days?
Of course, in the evening, just take a coffee filter, pour it through, so you have all the metal stuff out. If you have the T4, there's no magnet. Here you have a magnet. The most is even there. Coffee filter in a marmalade glass, just put it on side. The problem is only if you have organic material in there, like you have a wood turner, you have a little bit dust in there, also wood dust, it can start, of course.
To smell after a while.
Yeah, and mold.
Mold, yeah.
Yeah, so this is one point.
Yes.
But normally if it's only metal, it's good for a while. No problem.
Great. So generally speaking, less pressure on the diamond wheel, be a bit careful, and with your explanation, the less surface that is touching, the less pressure you should.
Exactly. And for the diamond wheels again, you have a fixed grid here. That means with a stone you have more or less 2 or 3 stones in one in the standard stone. Even in the black stone you can make it a little bit finer. There's one point. But in a diamond wheel, it's always the question, what do you want to sharpen? The rough stone is really just for reshaping or removal, or that you remove material. Nothing more, because you don't get a really sharp edge with that. Then you have to go on the fine, then you get really nice edge already. But if you want a much finer, then you can go to the 1200, the extra fine. Then you get like a silky, not polished, but like a silky, nearly polished finish. But
the DF is the most overall versatile, where you get steel removal, but still a good finish. Yeah, it's
if you think 220, go to 1000, you have 600 here, or in average it's 600 here. Absolute, the same level.
Good. Should we go on to the honing wheels? Here we have the leather honing wheel on, the LA220. How should we think about pressure when we hone?
When you hone your tools, you can apply quite a good pressure, because you can destroy anything here on the leather. In the expansion, most people say, okay, if you press in the surface, then here's the, it's easier maybe drawing just for Hugo again. You have the surface here, you have your tool, you get the pressure in here, you have the bevel must be here, so on the surface. That when you say, okay, I put really deep in the leather, the expansion here, it's coming up, releasing again. It's not like that you round it off your tip, because leather is very slow in releasing, so it comes later up again, so that's not an issue. Even here, a good pressure, you have a good control. The paste, the polishing paste, or the honing paste is the honing paste on it. It's the same. It's in the leather. It's small crystals, about 2,000 grit, 3,000 grit, something in there. It's difficult to say because they're getting in there and they crack down and the effect is getting less and less. Of course, the more pressure, you would say it cracks faster, but you press in the leather, so it is not a big issue, but you will feel it when you don't get any burr. If you're perfectly on the bevel, of course, and you don't get any burr removed, then you have to apply a little bit more on new polishing paste, even then you can use where we have a chisel to clean it up when the machine is running. You can just with the side remove it. This is more or less like refreshing, cleaning up, so that's more or less clean, but you see this is a little bit like wax, the used material, and then just apply a new one.
You could say that generally speaking, when it comes to honing as well, people apply too little pressure because they are often afraid to round off the edge or other things.
Exactly.
And if you put too little pressure,
nothing happens.
No, and you won't remove the burr, and therefore you won't get a good sharp result. So
here, more or less, you can't make any mistake with the pressure. So the more pressure you have, good controlled, of course, from the angle, it is absolutely no problem.
Of pressure. We have also the composite honing wheel, the CV220 or CW220.
It's the same. You can apply really a good pressure here, but at the end, here's a point. Again, it's rubber. When you apply too much pressure, then is what I said, the release time is a little bit faster here than on the leather. So too much pressure is not necessary here. It's maybe also counterproductive. It's better a little bit less pressure, but you can apply really. It's always difficult to say how much, because everyone will say 10 kilos. When you put 10 kilos, we have a scale, for example, will end up in whatever weights. Really put a good pressure in, that your nails getting really nice, a little bit white. This is a good indicator. And then it is perfect, because here you have also in the rubber already, because this is the compound, the polishing material in the rubber, and this is a little bit more coarse than in the paste, or more aggressive, not coarse, but a little bit more aggressive in there, because it's a little bit harder than in the leather, and it takes a little bit faster, so therefore you can use a little bit less pressure.
Great.
And again, compared to the surface, you have a chisel or a knife using the complete surface, or you have, again, a smaller one, just use partial, then you don't need the same pressure.
Amount, no.
So this is...
I think we should round it off soon. We have a couple of questions. Some of them are more general, but I thought we could try to answer them as well.
Sure.
We had one comment that I wanted. Margaret said that really interesting to learn that the honing wheel is 2000 grit. It's more complicated than that, it's important to say, because when we talk about grit, that is how many particles there is on a certain surface.
And size.
Size. And depending on the material, it gives a complete different result. So 600 grit on a diamond wheel compared to 600 grit on a leather honing wheel will give two complete different results. People often focus perhaps too much on the grit, but it doesn't really tell us anything if we don't know the material as well. So it's more complicated, and that's often people ask us, what is the grit of the leather honing wheel? And we are somewhat reluctant to say it, because it's so much more complicated, and we make it too easy if we just say that it's...
It's like the Japanese stone, 4,000, and you said 2,000, 3,000 here. It would make no sense going back to a rougher grit.
No.
But you still, some seals you get a little bit of burr, like a feather burr. You can remove it here without destroying the rest. So this is already...
So without getting too much into detail, it's more complicated. The grit doesn't tell us the whole story.
There's even so many different scales in mesh, in the diamonds, measured, or even 4,000 from our Japanese waterstone, compared to maybe when you sharpen by hand, it is maybe in the result the same like 8,000 or 10,000. So when people say, oh, I go about 10,000, 16,000 when I sharpen my knives, it doesn't matter that it's finer than that one, because you have also the rotation, you have different scales. If you check, sometimes it's really... Therefore we talk also here about grit and not in mesh, because people get a better understanding in comparison 220 to 600 or 1200 or 360.
TC saying, my honing wheel is smooth on part, but has rough spots as well. Does it impact the honing? Why are these rough areas become smooth?
They become smooth with the time.
Yeah, so I think
you have like here.
We don't find it really, but I think it's more the...
It's the fiber standing up, or this one here.
It might be the joint here, and that can stick up sometimes because it's glued together in the beginning. This will disappear quite fast, but if you want to speed up the process, you can use some sandpaper and just take it off,
roughen up,
and then it's gone.
Because then the fibers, they mixed up a little bit, and then it will be vanish. After a while, you can't find any joint here from leather wheels.
Great. Thank you very much, Wolfgang. I feel like a schoolboy. I've been standing in front of the whiteboard listening to the sharpening doctor preach about sharpening. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your passion for sharpening, and I think it goes through the camera, and hope the viewers enjoyed it as well.
Yeah. As you see, it's more than only pressure, it's material, there's so many things, and this is just roughly the surface touched, but otherwise it get too scientific.
Yeah, we could get even more nerd or scientific, but hopefully, perhaps we would lose most of you then. Thank you, Hugo. Especially big thank you to the viewers. We really appreciate you watching. If you have further questions, please ask them in the commentary below, and we'll answer them afterwards in writing. As I said, this was our last show before the holidays. In 2023, we will be back, and 2023 is a special year for us, Volkan.
Absolutely.
How come?
How come? Strangely, I started 10 years ago. We had a 40 years anniversary machine. It should be the 50 years, right?
Yes. So we have the 50 years anniversary next year, and you will see it in many different aspects. So bear with us and stay tuned. We wish you all happy holidays and happy new year, and stay safe.
And stay sharp.